Yo, 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 welcome back to another episode of the What Now podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Dr. Zach Thompson, owner of Within Chiropractic in Colleyville, Texas. Today, it's just me. Well, it's not just me. We're joined by a super, super special guest, Dr. Stephanie Wigner, who owns and operates Circle of Life Chiropractic, which is a prenatal and pediatric chiropractic office in Point Pleasant and Avon by the Sea, New Jersey. She's owned both of those since 2016 and 2017, respectively. Her and her husband also own the Source Wellness Center, which is a multidisciplinary clinic in Rahway and Metuchen. I think I'm pronouncing that right, New Jersey. And she and her husband, Kyle, both graduated from Palmer Davenport in 2015. And they have their now 2-year-old son, Jethro James, who they call Jet. She's been coaching other practitioners since the start of 2020 with one-to-one clients, but has begun building out her own programs since the end of 2022. With a burning desire to help other practitioners build legacies without sacrificing those that they're building it for. She wants more practitioners living truly aligned lives and getting everything their heart desires: financial freedom, time, autonomy, and more. Welcome to the What Now podcast, Dr. Stephanie Wigner.
Yes, thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Super, super excited, especially just having really taken in a lot of your content over the last several months now. I think a lot of what you're talking about is just so vital for specifically chiropractors, but I know you focus more with health practitioners in general to really start to understand and feel, especially from a financial side of things. But before we go into that side, give us a little bit of a background, catch us up since 2016, opening a practice, those type of things.
Yeah, it's been a little bit of a blur. It also feels like it's been 16 years. Not only, I guess we're almost at 10. Yeah, we're at 10 now. No, 10 since, no, just kidding. 10 since I've been with my husband. I have not been, I've only had my office for 8 years. I can't even do math. Yeah, so really, Kyle and I graduated from Palmer and Davenport, and we were like, okay, he missed living next to the beach. I was like, cool, I've been a Midwest girl my whole life. Let's go out to New Jersey and give it a shot. And so we both worked for other people when we first moved here. Kyle had an amazing position. They were really paying him well and taking care of him. He worked a lot of hours, but at least he was compensated for them. And I just was in a position I didn't love. So I was like, cool, I'm away from all my family and friends. There's no work-life balance whatsoever. And I just kind of want to do my own thing. I've never been a girl that really likes to be told what to do. And so I went and opened my own practice, specializing in pediatric prenatal right from the ground up. I knew even in school that that's what I wanted to focus on. So I had completed most of my training with the ICPA prior to graduation. And then, of course, that first year, my associateship, I was able to get some of the research stuff that we had to do back then. I don't even think you have to do it now. Completed my exam, got my CACCP, and that's when I was like, okay, I'm going to open up my own practice. And really just got a tiny 600 square foot office with minimal overhead. I think my rent was $1,000. Nice. And I opened up the rest on credit cards because I couldn't get approved for a loan. I went to 3 different banks and they basically laughed at me. I didn't have any family that could co-sign or anything like that. And so Kyle was like, it's cool, I got it. I'll pay our rent at the apartment and you go focus on building an office. And so that's what we did.
That's awesome. That's exactly, a lot of both Spencer, our other co-host, and I's stories. Like, couldn't really get a loan, especially being chiropractors. I feel like they're a little more difficult, especially when you haven't owned a business. You hear about, just get a business loan for your business, and you think it's going to be super easy, and it's the complete opposite. And I'm sure you were like us, where we opened day one and you were like, well, I got everything, like, burn the ships basically, and just exactly no looking back. And so going back to that time when you first opened, I know it feels like it was a blur. Maybe in those first 2 or 3 years, what would you say were the 2 or 3 of the biggest lessons you had to learn? And how did you learn them and overcome them?
My biggest lesson that I learned, one of them was like, no, I have to have my own back because there's not going to be anybody to come and save me. Right. Like whether this works, it's my fault. And if it doesn't work, it's also my fault. So taking like radical responsibility for what my outcome was going to be, was huge for me. Cause I think it could be a little isolating when you're in entrepreneurship, but the benefit of that is like you really get to control your destiny as well. And so learning that, and then really just learning on developing a community within my community. So using my office as a place to dive deep with community members, and also a way to develop collaborations and partnerships with other people in my community. That's really what I focused a lot of my time on those first couple of years, was just pouring into relationships, people who served my same ideal client, sure, but also just going deep with the patients I was serving. That if when I opened, I only had 10 people on the week, like I wanted to make sure the best part of their week was coming to my office. Because I knew that would, that felt really good, right? Like I want to pour into the people that are in front of me, but also I knew that would serve me well. If they felt like they were being seen and heard, they were going to tell their family and friends about me.
Right. And I think, I'm not sure what you had heard in school, but I know I would hear from a lot of docs that were 20, 25 years into practice that were, they had their books full, and they're like, don't spend more than 2 minutes or 5 minutes, whatever your like desired time with a patient would be. And it was, I know for us when we first started, it was like, well, there's 2 or 3 people on the books for today, and we're in the office for 7 hours, so I think it's okay if I spend the extra 10 to 15 minutes and really get to know them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And so with that, building that community, what does that look like nowadays, now that you've been open for 6 or 7 years collectively in both practices?
Well, we really started out by hosting events at our office, whether it was whatever our ideal client wanted. So I remember one time I had a pregnant mom. She was planning for a home birth. So I knew her midwife. I knew the lactation consultant she was going to use, so like we had very similar communities, typical like crunchier mom that had done her research. And that's how she found me. And then she was like, I just wish that I like knew somebody who cloth diapered. So I was like, oh, I guess I'm going to host a cloth diapering workshop at the office, because I wanted to solve whatever problem my patients had. I wanted to solve their problem because they were always going to come to me as their first point of contact, right? I wanted to be the go-to trusted resource. And so I knew another patient that I had that was also a crunchy mom, like had 3 children, had a cloth diapered all of them. I was like, hey, will you come and host a workshop at my office about like the ins and outs of cloth diapering? And she's like, oh my God, I would love to. So there was like a handful of moms there that all wanted to cloth diaper. And it was like, that's just pouring into the community. It's figuring out what they need and what they want. And if I could be the facilitator of that, or if I could be the connector of that and bring them all a little bit closer, provide a little bit more value, then that's what I look to do. In today's world, I'm not in the office quite as much as I used to be, because I'm busy being a mom and I'm busy consulting and doing all these other things, kind of being CEO of the clinics we do have. But I still think it's pouring into the people that are in front of you, hosting those workshops, being their go-to trusted resource, and then also just connecting with them on a deep level, but also being able to provide additional resources for them that's going to help their healing journey.
So really going above and beyond value wise, because they're already a paying customer, if you will. And now it's like, oh, you paid this much, and yes, we're helping you get out of pain or help your baby do this or do that, but now we're also going to add that cherry on top, and that I feel like probably diversified your practice 10x,
Definitely.
100x. Yeah.
Definitely. And that's being a prenatal practice. That's one of the most common feedback we get is like, why do I feel so listened to and supported when I'm here as compared to my pediatrician's office? And another thing that we do at our office is we have like a 24-hour text line. Now they know if they text us on a Saturday and we're in on the office, they'll get a text back. They know if they text us on a Sunday, they'll get a text back on Monday. So we have like within 24 hours of receiving your text, you should receive a response. And that I think has been a differentiating factor for us as well. No, we're not giving a ton of advice through that, but sometimes a mom just needs a listening ear, and she just needs to know that, hey, this is okay, or it's normal, or this isn't going to last, or you know what, let's take a look at the baby, go ahead and bring them in before their next appointment. And just being that supportive resource for them, I feel like has done an amazing good for us and our reputation.
I know I don't do it anymore, but I would give my business card, and I made my business card before we had our own phone number. And so it's just my personal cell phone number, and I made like 1,000. So it took us a long time to finally get rid of them and have to order up. But I would tell people, I was like, hey, this is my personal cell phone number. If you text me on a Saturday or Sunday, I may not respond right away, but if there's something urgent that comes up. And I was nervous because I was like, crap, like people have my cell phone number. And especially in today's day and age where people expect that sort of immediate response. But I'm sure just like for y'all, people are very understanding of it. It, if anything, drew us closer, because now people are like, oh, I can actually, like, they're a human. And I think that's
Totally.
something that I'm hearing from y'all's practices. the chiropractors that, yes, they're the doctors, but they're also coming down to a different level to really relate and connect with y'all's community, which is super awesome to hear. Super awesome.
And you want to talk about old school advice. I had received that same sentiment earlier that you shared. Like, doesn't matter if you have 200 people on your schedule that day or two, you spend the same amount of time with them. And that just never resonated with me. And I think anybody who's listening to your podcast, who's starting a business or maybe under 5 years in practice, it's like, just do what feels aligned to you. There's no one right way to do it. It's like, you have to trust your intuition, right? So if giving out your phone number sounds like a good idea, like just trust that, lean into that. You're being called to do that. Another thing that I had received bad advice for, though, I will say, is like, make sure that you're not too friendly with your patients. Make sure that you keep it about chiropractic. And I don't know if it's just my personality. Like, I like to go deep with people, but also we're taking care of women that are having miscarriages. Am I just going to say, hey, great, sorry about your loss, come back tomorrow for your adjustment? It's like, no, I need to be a place that's a safe space for her and, like, comfort her and be as resourceful as I can for her. That's what I feel is my moral obligation to do. So I think nowadays, like in 2023, we maybe have a different perspective on that, especially with how popular social media is. But that was something that I never resonated with. It's like, I don't have to have this complex or this ego, like, I'm the doctor, you're the patient, you have to listen. It's like, we're both just humans and I'm here to help you in any way that I can. Right.
And this is just out of sheer curiosity. When y'all are doing consultations or report of findings, is the doctor sitting on the opposite side of a desk or side by side at the desk? Side by side. Yeah. And can you explain that just a little bit for someone that maybe doesn't know the psychology or why you're doing that?
Yeah. So for us, we're probably also an office that's not like super traditional in day 1 and day 2 practices. Again, the population that I serve being 90% prenatal and pediatric, I'm not making them come back. I adjust on day 1.
Okay.
Because if they're pregnant, they want as much relief as they possibly can get. And I've been a mom with a colicky baby. And the last thing you want to do is like drive 30 minutes to an office, have your baby assessed and be like, cool, go home with your colicky baby and come back tomorrow. So that never resonated with me even before I was a mom. So we adjust on day 1. So typically how our process, you want me to break down our process a little bit?
If you want to, for sure.
Sure. So just briefly though, our process is like exam, orthos, motion palpation, going through the history, adjusting them, and then going over the care plan. So when we go over the care plan with them, we do packages in our offices. And so we'll select whatever package is best for them. We do sit down next to them, very intimate, hey, here's what we think is going to get you the best results, the quickest, the fastest. And this is what we're recommending.
Nice. And then leave it up to them.
Yep.
Yeah. And I think too, I mean, that's something we were talking with Elise Rigney, Dr. Elise Rigney, and they also do just a day 1 process. And she didn't necessarily challenge me on the moment, but it challenged my thought process of that traditional way and just thinking of how it kind of feeds into today's day and age where people want that immediate result. Like, with our technology, we use insight scans in our office. You can typically, like, I know, and I'm sure you're the same way, like, you're walking out of a consultation, out of your exam, you have a pretty crystal clear idea of what's going to be best for them. And so it's something I've been thinking about is like, is the day 1, day 2 necessary, and those type of things.
And people are pressed for time. So, a lot of the objections we get with a care plan is like, I don't know if I can make it here that frequently. If you show them from the beginning, my perspective, if you show them from the beginning, like, hey, I super value your time, I'm going to make it worth it while you're here. I'm not asking you to come more than I think is absolutely necessary. I think that goes a long way in their psyche as well.
Yeah. And I think too, just from another psychology standpoint, you're not, and this is maybe getting into more fear-based, but now they're not going home and talking to friends and be like, oh wait, no, you should check out my massage therapist or
try something else.
Yeah. Why would you go see a chiropractor? Which is cool. One thing I am curious of is how, especially being prenatal pediatric before being a mom, did you notice a drastic change in the way you cared for patients or the way you were running your practice or those type of things?
Oh my goodness. So probably not in the way that I care for patients. I'm probably a little bit more empathetic now. I think, when we're busy and we're running a tight ship and you got 10-minute appointment slots and you're going from one to the next, if somebody's 20-minute late, it could really mess up your schedule for the afternoon.
Mhm.
Right. And you might not be frustrated to the patient, but behind closed doors, you're like, oh, dang, they're running late. Like it's going to mess up my whole schedule.
Right.
Now, when that happens, I'm like, of course, I totally get it. You know how hard it is to get out of the house with a toddler, like that doesn't want to put their shoes on. So I think if anything, it made me more empathetic, and also just kind of humbled me. I know for myself, like my son, is a typical Chiro baby, obviously has 2 chiropractors
Mhm.
as parents. So like lives a really healthy, vitalistic life. But there were still things that happened that chiropractic necessarily didn't
Mm.
fix right away. Right.
Yeah.
So like, for instance, also not to dive in too deep here, but like I was planning a home birth. I ended up transferring. And so it's like, I got adjusted multiple times a week during my
Mhm.
pregnancy. I got Webster. I was doing all of the right things. And it's like, things are
Yeah.
still outside of our control. So I think becoming a mom really kind of um, opened my mindset to understanding that being a parent is multifaceted and multiple things are going to happen that you truly don't have control over. And we're just doing the best that we can.
Mhm. Mhm. And I'm curious too, just from a I guess I don't want to say belief because I hate saying like belief in chiropractic, but that conviction that you had. Because I know for me, I tore my pec in school, and so I had to get surgery. And for a second, I was like, maybe I don't need surgery. I can heal, like it'll heal itself, right? And then I saw the MRI, and the tendon is ruptured off the bone. I'm like, well, that'd be tough for it to
Okay.
find that. Um,
Yeah.
but I'm curious, what did that do for your conviction in chiropractic, having to go from the home birth to switching it up, if it did at all?
Um, it didn't really change my conviction for chiropractic, but what it did is it gave me an identity crisis.
Hmm.
I'm literally in the middle of birth, 42 hours into birth, and they're like, okay, like I did 31 hours at home. They're like, baby's stalling. Now I need to go to the hospital. Everything was completely safe with him, but they're like, you just have been in labor for too long. You need to
Hmm.
rest. But then it's when they told me I was going to need a C-section that I was like, literally looked at my husband as another chiropractor, grabbing his arm and being like, how the F is a prenatal chiropractor going for a
Right.
C-section right now? Like, this is against everything that I've studied. It's against everything that I know to be best for the baby. But like, I'm 42 hours into labor. Like, at some point, I have to listen to my medical team, And
Hmm.
um, that's also what felt good to me at the time was like, hey, I just want the baby here. I want him here safely. That's ultimately what mattered the most. But it definitely was like, oh my gosh, this isn't what I believe to be best for him in my grand scheme plan. But now, given the moment and given the information we have, like, this is what's going to be best for him at this current moment.
Hmm.
And so it was a little hard afterwards to be like, okay, what went wrong? Was there anything else that I could have done? But ultimately, like, I did all the right things. And sometimes there's just things that are outside of our control.
Yeah. And I'm sure there's multiple lessons in what you just said, that there's,
Absolutely.
things out of our control. And I'm sure
Well,
we
and
could,
when patients don't get better after, 20
yeah,
visits and we're like, "Oh my God, well, there are so many other things happening." It doesn't mean we're bad at our
right.
job. It
Right.
doesn't mean that chiropractic's not working. It
Hmm.
doesn't mean any of that. It means that patient is a multidimensional human that is having multiple things occurring at once.
Well, I think too, just being a year into practice, which is really not too long at all, but in school, you don't really get to take someone necessarily through a care plan. Like maybe at your
Right.
internship, you're there for 3 months and you might get to see someone get pretty close to the end, but you don't get to see that like from the start all the way to the end. And I know for me, because it does happen, and it's just part of the truth, right? That someone gets
Mm-hmm.
through a care plan, or through a package or something like that, and you're like, crap, like they still have something going on, and it can be a beatdown if you really let it. And then
Mm-hmm.
I think one of my good friends, we were talking about it. He's like, I think patients are, if they're in your office for even 10 minutes 3 times a week, like that's a total of a half hour, but it comes out to like less than 1% of their entire time in 1 week. And so it's like
Mm-hmm.
you have no idea what's going on in that 99% of
Absolutely.
things. And so I guess that's a good segue, because I know one thing, diving into your content, you're super big on mindset, especially more of an abundance mindset and those type of things. Um, what was your mindset like when you first started in those first 2-3 years, and then what have you really done to evolve and shift into this wealthy practitioner, if you will?
Oh, such a good question. So I remember like my first year of practice really being like, man, if I could just duplicate, I was making, I think, $60,000 a year at my associateship before I left. And I was like,
Mhm.
if I can just duplicate that, but do it on my own terms and like not have to work every single Saturday or like be able to take off a couple days, like that would feel incredible. And so for a while, I think it was a mindset of just don't lose, right? Like just
Yeah.
don't fail, just don't lose, just cover the rent. If I can make an extra 5K a month on top of my expenses, like I am super happy. And it was a matter of like survival and just making sure that I did what it took so I wasn't another failed business. That was in my startup. And I think that that actually hindered me. And it wasn't until I started getting around more people that were doing bigger and better things that I was like, wow, why have I just been aiming to not lose or aiming to survive when there's this whole other side of like thriving that I could be doing? Like my greatest possibilities and anything that I could desire is possible. So why am I selling myself short? And it was the transition of that. And what came about was the reason I have two locations is because I started covering for a doctor like 30 minutes away. He had like a disability issue. He was wanting to sell the practice. He wanted us to buy it, but it was by no means a good financial decision.
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, I'll cover your practice for a couple days a week. You could just pay me a daily fee. And I can do that while I have my practice. Cause again, I was in first year not at capacity by any means,
Yeah.
but just that further stretch of me being like, hey, how am I going to navigate being in my practice 4 days a week and at this other practice 2 days a week?
Yeah. Wow.
And what's that look like? It expanded who I was as an individual. I now had a higher capacity for handling things, right? And so realized I didn't want to do that for much longer than 30 days. So I let him know. And then when I came back to my regular practice, I was like, wow, now I'm kind of bored. Like
Yeah.
I already knew what it was like to take on more and see more people. I don't want to go back to this. So I was like, well, I think I'm going to open a satellite location. And so again, by no means was I at capacity when I opened the satellite location. It just happened to be in a building of a group of midwives that were already referring me patients. And so I was like, okay, this is the universe telling me like, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity. I have to take it. But I think just getting myself in situations that forced me to expand. And there's one thing that I love telling my clients is like, you have to be the expander of your own life. If you're waiting for somebody to come around and show you what's possible for you, like it's never going to happen. You have to start asking yourself questions like, how many more people can I see? How much bigger can I play? What is another business concept that I haven't thought about? You know, like really forcing yourself outside of your comfort zone. And I'm a big proponent for that.
I mean, super cool and super relatable. And I not unfortunately, but I tie everything back to lifting weights. That's what I've been doing since I was like 12 years old. And it's the same thing in the gym, right? Like you have no idea what you're capable of until you put 500 pounds on your back and then you go down to 200. Like, well, this is kind of boring, you know?
Yeah.
And so I'm curious, you know, when you made that shift in through your expansion, and I just started rereading Think and Grow Rich for like the third time, and I got through the first chapter last night. But what did you start noticing in your life once you realized, okay, I can expand myself, I have this new vision? What started to come into the field?
Well, it was definitely like, hey, I can definitely manage two practices. So let's see what that looks like. And then it was like getting to a point where my husband was still in his job. And he was a partner at that clinic. And it was just like, well, now we're starting to expand again and be like, well, why doesn't Kyle just have his own office? Right. And so by me expanding, it forced the people that were close to me to kind of expand as well. And so one thing Kyle and I do really well is like we have high expectations, not only of ourselves, but of each other. So with me expanding and me, you know, constantly growing our financial freedom and making way more money than I had made in my associateship, I was like, dude, you're next. And he was like, well, I kind of like it here. Like they're paying me 6 figures. Like life is good. I don't have the stress. I see how stressed you are. And it was like, yeah, but we don't want to stay in our comfort zone. Like that's you staying in your comfort zone. Like you have to play full out too. And he was like, okay. And so we joke about it on my podcast, but I'm always the one that like, that's a great idea. We're going to go and do that. And he's the one that like kind of has to sit on it and like mull it over and make sure that it feels really good, where I'm more sporadic or impulsive, I should say, where I'm like, that feels good. Let's go. He's like, let me think about it for 24 hours. So yeah, he sat on that. And then he was like, yeah, you know what? I think the time is now. Like, I do want more time freedom. We knew we wanted to have a family in a few years. And so he was like, yeah, I'm going to open my own practice too. And it's really just expanded into our life in other ways too. we just are committed to learning how to do things. We're like,
Mhm.
knowledge is power, right? So like we wanted to learn how to real estate invest. We wanted to see what that looked like. We wanted to see what it was like being an angel investor in other companies.
Mm.
And so just by expanding your circles and who you surround yourself with, like so many opportunities open up.
Yeah, I mean that's everyone says, right? You're the culmination or the average of the five people you spend your most time with. And then I heard Sean Dill say one
Mhm.
time your bank account is the average of the five people you spend your time with. And I was like, whoa, like I've never heard someone flip it that way. And I really started looking around. I was like, oh shoot, well, I guess we're all
Yep.
I mean, I heard
Yep.
it while I was in
Exactly.
I heard it while I was in chiropractic school, so I didn't take it too much to heart because I was like,
Yeah. There's not much
well,
you could do then.
yeah. But one thing before we dive in, I definitely want to hear more on the real estate side. That's definitely something that's piqued my interest for quite some time now. But I think, especially for some of our listeners that are in that first year, 2 year business ownership, they might hear you talk about wanting more freedom going into business ownership and thinking like, am I ever going to get there? So how did you start building that freedom and that ability to work 4 days? I think you were just in Austin for a week or something like that, like start having vacation. What did that
Yes.
really look like for you and having that freedom?
Honestly, the first time I took time off from the office, like truly closed the office, it was for a week and it was for our anniversary. So like obviously we got married, I closed the office, but we weren't crazy busy yet.
Mm-hmm.
But in 2018 we had really picked up, and it was the first time I closed the office for a week, but I had just hired an office manager, and truly an office manager, not like a part-time CA at the front desk, somebody
Yeah.
who was going to come in and help improve systems and was going to take stuff off my plate because I was the one doing it all, right? Social media, taking payments,
Mm-hmm.
scheduling, seeing the patient, all of it. And hiring her really changed the trajectory of my practice. And so I feel that hiring the right team member is what's going to allow you to start to have more of that freedom. And
Mm-hmm.
granted, the practice was closed, so we didn't really generate a ton of income that week, but I knew that when I came back, I would have a full schedule and that I could truly take time off. And that was
Yeah.
liberating.
Yeah. I think, and I want to dive into that a little bit more. What you just said of, you knew the schedule was going to be full when you came back, because that was something I did. I like my fiance is phenomenal, and like where she really gets me is she's taught me a lot of just like how to rest and kind of even on like a Saturday, like turn my business brain off and those type of things. But it was while I was still independent contracting. We were
Mhm.
about 2 or 3 months into that, and like things were starting to go really well. I felt like I was getting all this momentum, and then her family took us on a vacation to Disney World, and it was great. And then I came back, and because I was in the mindset of, okay, like I'm losing all this momentum by going on this vacation, there was a lot of guilt in that. I felt like I was letting people down. I went into like a 2 or 3 month slump of just like nothing going right. And so how do you help your mindset when you are preparing for a vacation, or how did you, going into that anniversary, like what was the prep work for you from a mental side of things?
The prep work was one, how do I get my systems in place so that my income truly isn't affected? And so, like, building
Mm,
up monthly recurring revenue is a great way to do that, right? If you're doing a lot of pay per visit, of course, your income is going to be affected if you take any time off from the practice. So,
mm-hmm,
that would be like my first piece of advice. Like, what systems do you have in place that could kind of pad you while you take these periods of rest?
mm-hmm,
Second of all, just knowing that like I couldn't pour from an empty cup. It's such a cliche saying, but it's so true. I actually get rejuvenated with time off. It actually allows me to think more about the business.
right.
And that's something that I think is super important to consider if you're a newer business owner, is that your business truly only grows when you're working on the business. So,
Mm-hmm,
not when you're working in the business, not when you're delivering all the patient care or seeing the new patients, answering the phone. Like your business isn't really growing during that time. Your true growth comes from when you're working on the business. If I'm working in the business every single day, Monday through Friday, and then I want to recharge on the weekend, I have to find time during the week to spend working in the business. So
mm,
then I usually say, like, okay, where can I take a couple hours, like an afternoon off where I can spend time working and improving the systems? And so for me, I always knew when I took time away from the practice, it naturally grew because I came back a better version of myself. I was rejuvenated. I had newer, fresh ideas for marketing or something like that that I would be able to implement in the practice. And
mm-hmm,
so also knowing, hey, like I like to do like the little challenge to myself. And that's one of the things I talk about, like how as an entrepreneur, can you challenge yourself to be better than you were yesterday? So I'll be like, okay, I'm going to take a week off. Can I have a record the week before I leave and then have an even bigger record week the week I get back?
I like that. Yeah.
And it's like, okay, just set up little challenges for yourself and see if you can hit them, especially I'm a little bit of a competitive person. So that works for me. If you're not, it probably wouldn't work. But
right.
I think again, it's that being that expander, like how can you challenge yourself to make it a positive thing that you're out of the office?
Yeah. I think it's funny just on the challenge side of things. I feel like as entrepreneurs, we're so much more geared towards challenges. I feel like now my Instagram feed is like someone's doing 75 hard, another person's doing like a different challenge. Like there's just a bunch of people doing challenges, and it's just a feed of entrepreneurs. And I think that we push ourselves into that growth mode. For you, what, from an educational standpoint, what were you listening to? Like what content were you consuming? Or even nowadays, like who do you go to for that type of stuff?
Yeah. So I have my own mentors and coaches too.
Okay.
So one of my mentors is Taylor Welch. I just had him on my podcast recently, and he talks about overcoming the monster within and kind of the monster that we face through this battleship of entrepreneurship, because it is a battle. Like we're always facing new obstacles as we're trying to grow. And so I've always had my own mentors, and also just like I'm a huge Tony Robbins fan. So I will read a Tony Robbins book. Awaken the Giant Within is like one of my favorite books. And then I would listen to his like little snippets on YouTube. Even back before YouTube was super popular, I would listen to audiobooks to and from the office. And so what I found was, if I'm heading into the office and I just have the radio on, like the radio is so disempowering. It's not even funny. First of all, our music these days is like nothing positive. It's all all negative.
Yep.
And second of all, I was like, I'm gearing in to go and serve. Like, what am I priming my mind with? So I had an audiobook called Abundance Now by Lisa Nichols. And just listening to her story and listening how things always like worked out for her and how you could have a positive mindset. And so I would listen to that on the way to the office and then from the office on the way home. And it was just so instrumental in setting myself up with the right mindset for the day.
That's huge. And I think too, like using your car, I think I heard Grant Cardone put it. He's like, you got to turn your car into your personal library, where like
I love that.
If you're wanting to grow, like your car is no longer the jam session. Not that there's anything wrong with, I know like Taylor Swift just came out with her version of whatever album, but like not that there's anything wrong with blaring the music on a nice summer day or something like that, but especially priming the brain. I think that's something I know for me. Like if I go in some days after a workout in the morning, I want to keep listening to music, and then I come in, I'm still in like that fired up mode, which is not necessarily the right mindset to come into the office with, right? Like I need to kind of prime my brain a little bit better. But I know for me, when I'm not, and I'm sure the same for you, I'm sure you're a little more disciplined, but when I do fall off listening to the podcast or listen to an audiobook to and from the office, I start to notice little dips here or there. And then, 2 or 3 months later, I'm like, shoot, like, what have I been doing? I've been
I got off my daily habits. Yeah, for sure. Just the other day, I was like, I'm not feeling super inspired. I don't know what's happening. I don't know. Like, and sometimes am I over consuming social media of not the inspiring things and just mindlessly scrolling? Like what's going on? Often when I find I'm not feeling super motivated, that's usually a problem. I'm just doing mindlessly scrolling. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to be super intentional because I can feel this, right? And being self-aware. I'm not feeling motivated. I'm not feeling inspired. I'm just kind of feeling blah overall. So I'm like, cool. Haven't worked out in a few days, need to go work out, need to put a podcast on, need to move my body, need to have time to think. And it's like, once you do that, you have a completely different mindset. You can kind of tackle anything. But I think the key is being self-aware when you find yourself in those dips, because we all have them. We're all going to have them at some point. We're not robots, so we can't just operate 100 every single day. But being able to know what gets you back into your groove is huge.
Yeah. And I think, my fiance and I talk about all the time is like the entrepreneurial roller coaster. It's like some days you're riding the high, and then other days you're looking down and you're like, oh no, I don't like what's down there. Or you're already down there and you're like, crap, hopefully we can get back going up.
Right. Hope we can even get back to where we were.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's definitely a real thing. And so going off of that, I really want to dive into the financial freedom and the real estate investing and those type of things. When did you and Kyle get that first notion to start looking into investing and stuff like that?
So, we bought our first property back in 2020, right before the pandemic. So looking back, probably wouldn't have bought a rental property in February 2020, but that's when we bought our first one. And our goal was, how can we start to make $5,000 a month of passive income? So take the money that we're making, that we're just sitting aside, and how can we get it to start to work for us? And so we bought, I think, 3 properties that year, and we learned really quickly that it's not as passive as everybody says that it is. So it still requires work. Even we had
Yep.
property managers for all 3 rental properties. But it's still a lot of work. Something breaks, you get a tenant's unhappy with something, it's just a lot of managing. And so, um, at one point we owned 8 different properties, and now we've scaled back, I think, to like 3 or 4 again, just because it was like, we don't know if this is what's going to get us to where we really want to be, because we don't
Okay.
want to be in charge of all these different properties in all these different states, because we don't really buy other than our primary residence in New Jersey, just because of how
Yeah.
expensive it is.
Right.
And so we were buying properties in places that were a little bit more affordable, like the Midwest, like
Mm-hmm.
Missouri and Ohio and places like that.
Right.
And so ultimately, what we learned from that is, yes, we still want to have this be part of our financial freedom. But what we learned is, we're still young and we're really good at creating cash flowing businesses. And
Mhm.
so that's actually what made us decide to open a second clinic for my husband. Is we're like, hey, we're really good at these practices, getting them
Mhm.
up and going and successful and profitable within a short amount of time. Why don't we just try to plug and play a really amazing team in there and see if we could just be CEO? Would that be a great asset for us to have that would produce cash flow as well? So not being the practitioner in there that is seeing the patients, sure, if we need to hop
Yeah.
in for coverage or things like that.
Mhm.
And so that was what we decided to do within the last like year and a half. But we do have other investments. We angel invest in other companies and stuff. But it's really just figuring out what works for you and
Mhm.
what's going to get you to your end goal fastest and probably safest, because real estate also isn't super safe. Like, you see
Yeah.
what the interest rates are. You could
Mhm.
have a house burned down. Like, we had one time a tenant completely not pay his gas bill, and so his pipes froze.
Nice.
And it was like, that fell on us, right? And so we were
Mhm.
like, oh, we don't really know if we want that stress. And there's obviously, if you buy newer properties, you don't have stresses like that, but it's just so multifaceted that I think sometimes in entrepreneurship we get sold that it's going to be easy, and it's not necessarily
Yeah.
true, that it's just going
Yeah.
to be easy to make this passive income.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think I love what you said about, passive income isn't always passive, just because
Yeah.
I have a mentor that owns multiple properties, and you hear all the time, like, well, they're not cutting their lawn and it's part of an HOA, and so now I have to go over there and cut the lawn. Or same as like you just said, like the pipes froze, or they are tenants and they are renting. So if the toilet breaks, like, you got to go over there.
Yep.
And so I think we do get, from a passive income side, I think everyone, not just entrepreneurs in general, but everyone gets told, like, oh yeah, just create passive income and then you're set for life. And one of my favorite books, The Wealthy Gardener by John Saforic, he talks about like building your wealth through real estate. And he's kind of mentoring another guy along the entire book. And he's like, it's never passive. Like, if anyone ever tells you it's passive income, like, they're selling you snake oil, basically. Like,
Totally.
even like the stock market is not necessarily passive,
Mhm.
because you got to keep up with it and those type of things.
And I love too, like, it's not overnight. Just like
Yeah.
building a business to be where you want it to be doesn't happen overnight. Neither does building these other wealth assets. It's not overnight. Like, it is a 10, 15, 20-year play.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
just having that realistic time frame, I think, is super helpful. Have you read the book Outwitting the Devil?
Yes, it's so
Okay.
good. So
So
good.
good.
Yeah.
When you said you were reading Think and Grow Rich, I'm like, if you haven't read that, even to all your listeners, like, it is such a good one for entrepreneurship, because he gets
Yeah.
his butt kicked over and over and doubted over and over. And it's just like such a good book.
Yep. Yep. I mean, it's phenomenal. And I've read it paperback, but I've also listened to the Audible. And I'm not sure if you have too, but
Uh-uh.
the publishing company that does the Audible, they actually have different voices for Napoleon
Okay.
Hill and the devil. And so it's actually pretty entertaining for an Audible. It's pretty cool. It's pretty
Oh,
cool.
that's awesome.
Yep. Yep. What is, for you, going a little more into that abundance side of things that I've heard you talk about quite a bit? Um, I know one thing you talk about quite a bit is, like, you always pick up a quarter if you find it, even though you've amassed this wealth portfolio, you're still stopping and picking up the quarter. Talk to our listeners about that. just a little
Oh
bit.
yeah, I want the universe to send me money always and in all ways. So if
Mhm.
I walk by a quarter on the street, why are they going to send me $1 or $5, or $100 bill? It happens often. And I also think that we have to, because like you talked about that roller coaster of entrepreneurship, like a lot of times it feels like we're just getting punched in the face over and over. Even if we're having a good week, like you're still going to get punched in the face like
Oh yeah.
twice at least, even if
Mhm.
you're having a good week. And so I like to look for little signs in my environment that the universe has my back. And so if I find money on the floor, I'm like, oh, thank you, universe. Like, this is amazing. I pick it up because I'm like, yeah, I want you to send me an unexpected rebate of $100 in the mail. Right.
Right.
And when I look for those synchronicities or those little coincidences in my daily life, I know that I'm on the right path. I take it as a little sign like, okay, everything that I'm worried about or stressed about right now, it's all going to work out for me. It always does. It always works out the best possible way, even if it's not how I originally planned. And so one of those ways of tapping into abundance is looking out for like the little things that are working out in my favor.
Mhm.
And I also like to keep just like a little journal of, hey, things feel tough, but here's everything that I'm grateful for. And
Yeah.
so that really helps pull me into that abundance mindset as well.
Mhm. Mhm. And then I know for me, it's really easy when things are going tough to think of things you're grateful for. But I know, like, just being frank, like last month was our worst month of the year. And
Mhm.
then I started thinking about, well, it's crazy because we've been open for a year. And yes, this was our last month or worst month of the year, but it was far and away better than any of the months we were open last year. And it's like, look how far we've come, where it's like, man, like I feel down right now, but what would this time last year Zach be thinking, and those type of things. And I think reflection has been such a powerful piece, whether it's just visualizing or going into a meditation or journaling, like you were talking about. Like reflection to me has been uber powerful in just crafting a better mindset and kind of getting you out of that funk. Yeah.
Absolutely. And like you said, we're all going to have those down months, but
Mm-hmm.
being able to put it in perspective. And one thing for me too is like, just most of us that are entrepreneurs are because we're super driven achievers, right? We want to
Mm-hmm.
achieve something amazing. But being able to say, like, is this one slow month really going to change my life or matter 12 months from now? And if it's like, no, it's like, why am I going to spend another day stressing over it?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
let's just hit the pavement and do what we know that works. Because we all
Yeah.
have those months.
Yeah. Where you just feel like, how am I ever going to get out of this? It's
Mm-hmm.
much easier to, I know my mom actually would teach me, if you, um, if it's not going to bother you in 5 minutes or in 5 years, don't waste 5 minutes on it. Which,
Totally.
as an entrepreneur, when it comes to like the financials or the growth of a practice, it's a little bit more like, I don't know, it might affect me in 5 years, but at the same time, I'm just being in the circles I'm in, and I'm sure you're in. It's
Mhm.
like it's probably not going to, right?
No, no.
Um, so with that being now in the more consulting side of things, what what got you to want to consult, and then also what would be like if someone's like, I'm kind of liking what I'm hearing from Dr. Steph, maybe I want to look into consulting with her. What are your
Mhm.
typical clients look like in that sense?
I wouldn't say that I have a typical client, but I started coaching back in 2020, one-to-one clients, and I really started because so many friends were like, "Hey, can you tell me what you did for this? Like, how this looks like it's working out really well for you." And I was like, "Yeah, I guess they don't really give us the blueprint for success in school. It's really just how to take care of patients." And so I was
Mm-hmm.
like, "Okay, there's something to this." And I started doing one-to-one consulting, and I loved it. And it just was so exciting to me to be able to get behind somebody's business and give them advice as if it was my own business and what I would do to fix like the bottlenecks or some of the issues they were having and then see it work. And it's like, wow, I have a system to this.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what ultimately led me to build the mastermind that I lead. But most of my clients, I would say 90% are chiropractors. I do have like some salon owners and acupuncturists and other things like that. But
Mm-hmm.
one thing um, they all want is they all obviously want to grow their business and improve themselves. And for me, because I am a busy mom, we have 4 practices, we have a toddler, we want our family to grow in the future. I
Mm-hmm.
really like to work with people who I'm aligned with. Like our values are the same. Like, hey, your business is important, but it is not the most important thing in your
Yeah.
life. Your spouse has to be important. Your work-life balance, your mental health, like that's all really important as well. And so I have a Facebook group that, anybody could join where we kind of break down some of the things we're doing in our offices behind the scenes. I post like inspirational stuff, motivation, or, hey, we did this marketing thing. It worked really
Mm-hmm.
well. You guys should try it. So if anybody wanted to pop in that's a great resource for people. And that's just the Wealthy Wellness Practitioner, I believe, on Facebook. And yeah, but most of them just come to me because they're like, hey, I know that I'm destined for more. I just don't know
Mm.
what that looks like, and I don't know how to get there.
And so you come in as that catalyst and fire them up, but also give them tangible things that they can do. Um,
Absolutely.
awesome. Awesome. I know one thing too. I think you had an Instagram post where you were talking about how in society, especially for women, you're told you can either be a really good mom or a really successful business owner. Like you can't be both.
Mhm.
How was that breaking down kind of those limiting beliefs that society, like you were just born up into? How did it go breaking down those limiting beliefs for yourself?
Oh, good question. So one thing that my mother always did that was super powerful that I think if anybody's listening that's a parent, they should do. My mom didn't do everything right, but she did this one thing right, which was telling me that I could be anything that I wanted to be, right? That I was
Mm-hmm.
capable of achieving anything. And I think just knowing that from an early mindset really kind of programmed me to know that anything was possible. However, as you grow older and you start to learn more and you go to college, and it's just like, yeah, but you have to choose a lot of different things.
Right.
And I just really am the type of person and personality that doesn't want to have to choose between this or that. I just want both. And so like I don't want to have to choose between being a mom or being a badass entrepreneur. I want to be both, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
it was really before we started our family figuring out what that looks like and how was that going to be possible, because I can't be a mom and still have multiple 6 and 7 figure businesses if I don't have the right systems or the right team in place, right? So it's not, there is a blueprint to it. You kind of have to figure out which step you're on and then progress from there. But I just always knew I didn't want to have to choose between being a supportive wife or having my own business. Like I'm going to be both, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that sure, it's probably tiring when you want both, but it's also super rewarding and fulfilling. And for me, I'm not a big fan of being comfortable. Like comfort is a silent thief. And
Yep.
so if I'm comfortable for too long, I know that I'm plateauing. And so I'm constantly pushing myself to try more things, to try new things. And it was just a matter of like, what do you really want? And if you really want all these things, you're going to have to step outside of the box or step outside of the model that's been shown to you. Kind of like we were talking earlier, Zach, like the model that's shown within chiropractic is if you're both chiropractors, you work in the same clinic together.
Yep.
Well, we didn't want that. We wanted something new. We wanted something different. We each wanted to be able to practice our respective techniques that really didn't belong under the same roof because we were going to confuse our marketing message. It doesn't mean it's
Yeah.
not possible. It doesn't mean people don't do it, but it was like, how can we grow these practices? It wasn't like, okay, well, Steph gets a practice, but Kyle doesn't, or Kyle gets a practice, but Steph doesn't. It was like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, well, how do we both have a practice and how do we make it to where financially it makes sense? We're not going to grow them both from 0 to 100
Yeah.
overnight. So like, let's stair step it a little bit so that everything we want is possible.
Mm-hmm. That's super good. And I think too, I mean, it's amazing the more I've dove into it, just how many limiting beliefs I didn't necessarily know I had, but because I've just been a part of society for so long, I know for me, similar to you, I always thought, and it was one of my biggest fears in getting into business, was you can either be super successful as a business owner or you can be a really great dad. You definitely can't be both. And it's something I still wrestle with because I think I mentioned like I love to work. Like once we get done with this podcast, I'm going to a screening and it's like a Friday, and like I just love to work, and it's a fear of mine that work mentality will always be there, and so trying to implement those systems of okay, like the business will thrive even if I'm not at the screening or even if I'm not in the office. Um, and so where I want to go with that, really for some of our last questions, but what would you say are systems or pieces of systems that you feel a lot of chiropractors specifically are either missing or getting wrong to create that freedom?
One, they don't know what they want. They say they want
Mm,
time freedom, but what does time freedom look like? Does time freedom look like every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday off? Does time freedom look like 4 weeks of vacation throughout a year? It's like
mm,
sometimes we just have to sit down and actually write in specifically what it is we want. And also, um, like what a lot of people so I hope this makes sense, but like, and I hope it doesn't sound any type of way for somebody who's just starting, but making $10,000 a month is super easy. You
yeah.
have to get 10 clients and give away $1,000 worth, see
Yeah.
$1,000 worth of care. And that is it. Like that is easy. I think sometimes we overcomplicate it. And so it's like, if you knew what your income was that you needed to be happy and you reverse engineered from that, you start to see how simple it actually is. Like, and so I think sometimes we just would rather say it's hard so we don't have to figure it out
Hmm.
rather than sitting down and being like, okay, this is figure outable. Let me just sit down and write down everything that I want and then figure out how I'm going to get it.
Yeah. And I think to even kind of that goes right hand in hand with that. Yes, we say it's too hard, but then even though we may have said 2 or 3 months ago or years ago, that's what we wanted, we start to convince ourselves, oh, that's not really what I want. And I had this epiphany too, and I'm curious your thoughts on it, but you know, I feel like a lot of us, we always say like you set your goals, right? And a lot of us will say, well, I want a nice house one day. And I was starting to think like, well, a lot of us say we want a nice house, and then we get to be 20, 30 years down the road and we're in the same house that we've always been in. And now all of a sudden that's the nice house that we've always wanted, even though we really wanted that 5, 6 bedroom house that we would drive by every day. And I think, for me and Spencer and I talk about it a ton, but really reverse engineering and crafting a very crystal clear vision of what you want. And so I'm curious too, what are things that maybe you've written down or thought about that when you were thinking about them, you're like, this is crazy. Like maybe there's no chance that this is ever going to happen. And now you're starting to live in that sort of lifestyle.
You just reminded me of something when you were talking about that earlier this week. I was doing a Peloton and the instructor was like, everybody wants to say they want beast mode until it's time to become a beast. And
Mm,
it's like, so true.
yeah.
Everybody wants this financial freedom until it's time to do the things that are required to get financial freedom, right?
Right.
Because I talk a lot about work-life balance, but I think that gets misconstrued that I don't work my ass off because I still do.
Yeah.
I was in Austin last week, sure, but I still worked while I was there.
Mm-hmm.
Especially like from the consulting side, obviously not the chiropractic side, but I think everybody says they want these certain things until they realize what it takes. And it's just easier to stay exactly where they are instead. And I mean, so much of what I have today, like if you would have told me in school, Kyle and I talked about it, like he drove for 1-800-GOT-JUNK because he couldn't pass Part 4 boards the first time.
Mm,
And so like to live in New Jersey, it's super
yeah.
expensive. If you would have told us at that time in 2015 that we would have owned 4 clinics, we're like, yeah, right. What are you talking about? Right. And now maybe I would go back and be like, hey, don't do that. That's a lot of work. Maybe just do one and like make that one really great and be happy. But I mean, everything, like even, the cars we drive and the home we own and the people that we get to help and serve every day. Even like we were talking about it, like we never thought we'd have close to 20 employees. Like how cool between our companies is it that we put food on the table for 20 different
Yeah.
people?
Yeah.
Like that is amazing.
Yeah.
And like my office manager has been with me for 5 years. She's worked her way up. She has a salary. Like she just bought herself a brand new Mercedes. And she was like, never did I think I'd be able to drive a car like this. And I'm like,
Yeah.
how freaking awesome is it that my business was able to be a facilitator for her, able to reach her dreams too.
Yeah.
And so that's what gets me inspired now too. It's not about like us hitting a new revenue number. We're going to grow every year no matter what, because that's who we are at our core. But like that doesn't really get me excited. I can throw a number on my vision board that I want to hit in revenue, but that doesn't really do it for me. But being able to see the difference like in my team's lives and seeing them transform, and then the clients that I work with and seeing their business go from 0 to $500,000, I'm like, that is what gets me excited.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
that ripple effect is so much bigger, just like us changing our lives or changing the lives of the people that we work with in the office. Like helping them, restoring health and vitality, and then them being a better wife, a better mother, a
Yeah.
better daughter. Like, that's what gets me excited. Then all of a sudden they
Mhm.
tell me they have a new child and they're going to do things different with that child than they did the first. I'm like, wow, we are truly changing their lives. That's what gets me excited.
Man, that got me
Sorry, I
fired.
just got
That
all
got me.
hyped up.
No, that was great. That was great. I mean, I'm speechless. That was, I mean, now I see, I mean, from listening to you for a long time, I got to see, you know, where that fire was coming from. But now I think too, especially for our listeners, what Dr. Steph just did, I'm sure you do pretty frequently with your teams and with the people you're consulting.
Mhm.
And what I mean by that is you set, or most likely are setting, a vision much higher than what the people around you can necessarily see, because you are that visionary. And how were you always that way? Is that something you've had to train? And and where do you see a lot of entrepreneurs lack vision as well?
I think you're kind of born as a visionary or you're not. I think it's a little hard to train that, and there's nothing wrong with that. We need integrators in this world just as much as we need visionaries. If I am a visionary, so if I don't have my assistant being like, hey, we have to do this email, hey, you've scheduled this podcast, you have to show up to it, like, hey, if somebody wasn't holding my hand, I would just be out here in la la land, like dreaming up new ideas, right? So I think you either kind of have that visionary or you don't, but if you are the visionary, it's important to have somebody on your team who's going to help you implement and integrate all of your ideas. And then vice versa, if you're an entrepreneur, but you're like, man, it's really hard for me to kind of dream about where I'm going, hire somebody to help you do that, because it is hard when you're in the day-to-day and it's like, I can't see the bigger picture. Like you said, I can't see where I want to be in 5 years. Like, I don't know the right questions to ask myself. There's so many resources and people out there that can help you do that, and help you achieve that.
And I think, you know, I'm also very much a visionary. You know, I joke about it all the time that it's a joke that I upset my team because it's the middle of a shift and I get an idea.
You want to change.
Like, yeah. And I'm like, hey, we should start doing this. And then we sit back down. They're like, what do you think? What were you thinking there? Like, how are we going to do that? I'm like, I don't know, but we should do it. You know, you guys figure out how we're going to do it. And it's the same thing like with me and my fiance and those type of things. But one thing kind of to wrap up, what would you say if you were to leave with a couple statements or sentences? Like, what would you say are 2 or 3 things that entrepreneur, that first year, second year entrepreneur can, and I'll invite you and encourage you to be a little more bold than just can, but should start doing and need to start doing. I know as a consultant, you probably hate the word need, but just to kind of give that right person the proper kick in the butt, if you will.
Well, I'll tell you exactly what I told one of my clients this week. I was like, I want you to light a fire under your ass and go out and meet as many people, at least over like one person a day. Meet as many people as you can over the next 60 days before the end of the year, so that your 2024 looks much different than it did this year. Because you just haven't met enough people. So I would encourage everybody listening to this, like, who can you go and meet and make a positive first impression on, so that when they need your services, they think of you first. Because so many of us are staying in our offices and like, I don't know, I need more patients. And it's just like, go out and meet somebody, go out and shake hands with somebody, go out the old fashioned way, you know? Marketing has been so easy for us with social media and like Facebook ad companies, but it's like, all those older chiropractors than us all did that by shaking hands with people, you know, and that's what aided in their success. So I think we've missed that a little bit. And so I would say to do that, and similar to what we talked about earlier, just like priming your mind. If you are not in a good headspace, maybe talk to somebody, but just find a circle that's going to inspire you and uplift you and support you, because we all need support. Like, we're not always crushing it. Like you said, you know, I'm sure you were leaning on your fiance when you were feeling down. You know, I lean on Kyle all the time if I'm starting to have some of that self-doubt or imposter syndrome creep in. So it's like, whether that's your partner or whether that's a mentor, whether it's family, it's usually not family because they don't understand what it's like to be an entrepreneur. But just have somebody that can help you lift you up and also help keep you accountable.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I want to make one more side comment, just because you were talking about going out and meet someone. I know for me, it would be so easy when we started out, and even to this day, where it's like, I know I need to go network. I know I need to go shake some hands, and I love networking. But what if I just make this one Instagram post that, you know, is a picture from a photo shoot or something, and I make a crafty caption? I think that will count, and that'll definitely bring someone in. And it's like, no, it probably won't. It probably won't.
Well, it will work, but and you know what else works
Yep.
really well? It's like, right? Like let's attack
Yeah.
it from all different
Right.
areas.
I like to think of social media, especially like the paid advertising, as that, like I call it like passive marketing, where it's like you still need
Mhm.
to be doing the active networking and those type of things. But
Absolutely.
while you're sleeping, someone's on Facebook and boom, you're good to go, right?
Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. Dr. Steph, this was super amazing. Is there anything else that you just feel on your heart or feel encouraged to share, or you feel pretty complete?
I just want to encourage everybody listening to this, like everything that they desire is possible for them. And the first 5 years of entrepreneurship are by far the hardest. Something that
Mm,
one of my mentors said to me, and I know we're not, it doesn't matter whether it's 500,000 or 100,000. It's like your first $500,000 is the hardest to make.
mm,
After that, it becomes easier. So if you give up before you reach that point, you're never going to know what you're truly capable of. And so just keep going, keep listening to this podcast, keep coming back for inspiration, and just know that everything you desire is within your reach.
awesome. Awesome. Dr. Steph, thanks so much for joining the Whatnot podcast. Where can our listeners find you and get plugged in with what you're putting out?
Yeah, so I am on Instagram at Dr. Steph Wigner or the Wealthy Practitioner. And then on Facebook, like I shared earlier, our Facebook group is the Wealthy Wellness Practitioner. And I would love to have you guys join us.
Awesome. Awesome. Definitely get connected. She has a great podcast as well, The Wealthy Practitioner. I think you put out episodes once a week, correct?
Yep, every Tuesday.
Awesome. Awesome. Definitely listen to those as well. Thank you for joining the What Now podcast. Maybe we'll have a part 2. Other than that, look forward to the next time we get to connect. Thanks, Dr. Steph.
Yes. Thank you.